Well, so I did think quite a lot about this when I was deciding what domain name to buy, and I did buy Pip Wilcox Ceramics rather than Pip Wilcox Pottery, and that's because I think it was partly a statement of intent, but also just a kind of, rightly or wrongly, maybe this is just my association, but I think that often the word potter is associated with a hobby. And I suppose I was saying to myself and anyone else who was interested that that this that I was wanting this to be something other than a hobby. Um, but I don't, but I don't mind. But also when I meet people and they say, "What do you do?" I say I'm a potter, because actually it feels a bit pompous saying I'm a ceramicist. Yeah. And I grew up with Paul pottery and the leech pottery, you know, all stuff that I love and that I know that I feel very kind of sentimental towards and would have had an impact on me. So I haven't got a problem with the word potter at all. But there was just something about what I called myself. And so I suppose context is so important, isn't it? And so I think probably it depends why to whom and why I was describing what I do. And it also gives you the opportunity to use different words, because it's a bit boring to keep saying potter, 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 you know, if you're writing something, writing a piece or whatever it is. So that's quite nice that you can use. In that UK handmade piece, I had to stop myself saying, oh, could you say something different? Because it just felt really odd, but I thought, well, no, it's just a word. When they said being a freelance, blah blah blah, you know, talking about me, it just felt really, I don't know, it just felt really strange. Yeah, I'm 45, and I'm sort of just, you know, I've very recently become a potter, so it's still any ceramicist or potter, either of those words still feel very odd, and I'm only just getting to the stage where I can, if someone asks me what I do, where I can say I'm a potter without feeling like I'm lying or being arrogant or being presumptuous or yeah. But in terms of, yeah, for me this is very, it feels like for the first time ever, no, probably the second time actually. For the second time in my life, I'm doing something for lovely reasons, and it feels very, everything feels very aligned. And it's the first time actually that I don't have to. There's no bullshit. There's no. I'm not interested. I don't. I'd rather not be successful than to have to get involved with game playing and lots of the kind of activities and behaviours that I have associated with my past working life. It it feels really 100% integrated with who I am, which is so so lovely. I feel incredibly fortunate that I I was sort of enabled through all sorts of reasons. I was able to take 3 years really, amazingly, to be and to exhale and to pause and to start to start to it's not even to start thinking about what I wanted to be and do, because it wasn't a thinking, but just to start becoming. Yeah, so it all feels very special. So I went to university in Brighton. The University of Brighton, it was a poly and became a university in the nick of time. and did a multidisciplinary humanities degree years ago, at the normal time. So I graduated in '93, and I had worked all the hours that I could work since I was 14. So I'd done evening stuff and weekend stuff and holiday stuff, but I hadn't been pursuing joy in any way, like many of us, like most of us, really. I sort of fell, incredibly to me now, I fell into financial services when I graduated. It's what my dad has always done. It was familiar to me. I worked for him in the school holidays, and it hadn't really. I just didn't have the language, the anything to even know that I could work out what I wanted to do and what would be joyful and wonderful. None of those things occurred to me at all. So I fell into financial services, somehow had a kind of 12-15 year lapse in concentration and stayed in financial services for all that time. Was often, one of the only women in the room. I was a financial advisor, had specialised in high net worth clients. I loved the relationship aspects of things. I really enjoyed. So for me, to stay sane, my kind of narrative about what I was doing, which was true, was that I was looking after people. I was helping people to build security and safe retirements and whatever. But really, I was doing it probably to please my dad, although actually it didn't please him at all. But I think that's what I was trying to do. And then whilst I was doing that, I went back to university, and over a number of years I retrained as a counsellor, as a therapist. Not necessarily because I wanted to become one, but just I wanted to do it. It wasn't fulfilling me at all, what I was doing professionally. And so that was part of me finding my way to something that was more about me and what I actually was and wanted, and less about what I should be doing, trying to please other people or whatever. That was a really enjoyable, stimulating time, and that was really lovely to start meeting different types of people, to the people I'd been meeting through my working life. They say, don't they, that probably the clue to what would make you happy as an adult is to think about what did you used to do when you were a kid, when you weren't thinking about making a living. So I was always fiddling around with stuff. I did a lot of, I liked drawing and cutting up bits of clothes and making bags and stuff, but I didn't. My school was really basic when it came to the arts. My dad's actually a very creative man, but I think I didn't show enough of a leaning for anyone to I wasn't for anyone to spot it and think, oh, she should be doing such and such thing. So really and I suppose because I didn't grow up in an environment where people were making and making for a living, certainly not in my immediate environment. So it simply didn't occur to me. It did not occur to me at all. In fact, until so recently, being a potter, being a maker was something very much out there that people over there did, and what lucky buggers they were. But that was not within my gift. That just, and I can't really make sense of that, but it seemed as likely as being an astronaut. It really just wasn't in my world. Even though I enjoyed, making stuff or whatever, and even though it seemed a really attractive idea, it seemed very much over there, what other people do kind of a thing. And also I I didn't do a lot of sophisticated making at all, so there was no reason that I or anyone else around me when I was growing up would have looked at what I was doing and thought, oh, you know, this girl has a real gift. Just because I didn't, I didn't have the opportunities, I suppose. That stuff just wasn't happening around me. So really, really all of this has come out of really challenging situations. When I really started having a really strong urge / need to make was when we were struggling to conceive. So I mean, I don't suppose it takes much analysis really, but so we were struggling to create, and I was quite frantically actually at first creating. So we were going through IVF and what have you, and I was knitting and I was doing enamelling and I was doing felting and I was it was a therapy, but I think it was very literally that I had a drive to create, and we were trying to create a life, a child, a baby, and it feels like the two things were quite connected. But yeah, I had a real drive to create, to make physical stuff, for there to be something that I had made, that was a physical thing that could be touched and seen and mostly given to other people. I don't know. So the first time I ever did pottery was in 2008, and I was working. I worked in the third sector, the charity sector, for quite a few years. So I've really followed my nose. Once I got fed up with financial services and realised I couldn't hack it anymore, I did all sorts of bits and pieces. But at that time I was doing corporate fundraising in the charity sector for quite a while, and this particular organisation was really shitty. It was awful to work for, but they gave each employee a personal development budget. I don't suppose that happens now, but at the time they did. And I somehow wangled it that a pottery weekend in Herefordshire was exactly what I needed. It was going to make all the difference. And I really enjoyed it. But still, even then, it still did not occur to me that, well, plus it wasn't an option really financially and whatever, just to pack everything in. So I really enjoyed it, but it didn't occur to me that, how about actually trying to forward some kind of making path. That was absolutely, I wasn't, it was just a weekend and I wasn't like a superstar at it anyway. I just enjoyed it. Fast forward a few years, I spent 3 years working as a humanist funeral celebrant, which I absolutely loved. It was, it was beautiful. It was just a real coming together in a really wonderful way. It was a really lovely coming together of all sorts of skills and abilities that I'd built up in fairly kind of soulless environments professionally that I was able to bring together in. It was such a privilege to do something. It felt like a real sort of primitive. I felt like it was having a role that was such a fundamental role in the tribe, in the community. As conducting funerals, as helping people deal with that ritual and that ceremony was amazing. It was such a privilege. And I did that for 3 years, and I did over 300 funerals, and it was very unusual. It's very unusual to do that work on a full-time basis, which is what I was doing. I'm not a very moderate person, and so I was very boundaried. I had a very appropriate professional boundaries in place, but I really threw my heart and soul into it, and I'm quite porous, and so after about 3 years I just started to feel that I'd absorbed, there's a sort of a build-up of grief that I had absorbed from all these hundreds of families that I had worked with who had lost people in sometimes the most horrific of circumstances, jumping on railway lines and being stabbed to death and all sorts of, plus the more, you know, normal ways of dying. And yeah, I just started to feel not very well with it, and I wasn't really, and what made it so beautiful for me in a way was doing it in a really wholehearted way. So I wasn't at all interested in learning to do it differently and suddenly becoming very detached, and so I just felt it had a shelf life, and so I stopped doing it and got a job at the University of London, and did that for a while. But in 2010, that was the beginning of a really difficult period. So within a period of about 18 months, we had IVF, we had a miscarriage, my brother-in-law, my husband's only sibling, died completely out of the blue. I had a couple of surgeries, I was mugged. My husband's late mum was unwell and was sort of beginning the journey of dementia, and so it was just a really difficult time, and there wasn't enough time between each of those events to recover really. But I didn't really know that at the time. I just kept on working and doing all the normal stuff of life. And then 3 years ago, when I was working at the University of London, I got signed off work with stress and anxiety. That's officially what the GP said on the sick note, and which, again, a bit like becoming a potter, was one of those things that I kind of always imagined happened to other people. It was really surprising to me that I became one of those people that got signed off work with stress and anxiety. And I kept getting re-signed off, and so eventually I resigned because I felt really uncomfortable with being paid to not work. And really, yeah, I just came to a grinding halt. My body was really unhappy in all sorts of ways. And although obviously I'm not, I'm not to say I'm grateful for the events that triggered that would be, doesn't feel quite right, but I am, in a way, I am grateful that I did come to a grinding halt, because it's actually given me the most incredible opportunity that I know I wouldn't have been able to create for myself, which was a starting again from nothing, from rebuilding from the ground up. And I had nothing to lose because I wasn't able to work, so I didn't have to make those terrifying decisions to stop working in order to build my dream or whatever, because I already wasn't working because I couldn't. So I was really down for a period of time. We moved here, so moving here was a really massive thing. So we were living in a tiny little flat in London. I kind of, looking back on it, I think I was literally dying. I don't think I would have recovered in London. I just couldn't. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't leave the home in London. There just wasn't what I needed there to heal, get better, to put myself back together. So I have a real survival instinct, I think, and although I have to fight quite hard not to be melancholic, I am also a real optimist, and I think my kind of survival instinct kicked in. I knew I needed to get out of London, so 2 years ago we moved here, and it's been so important. I think actually, regardless in a way of where I am, I think there's something, I think it's very difficult, or for me anyway, I wasn't able to create massive change in my life whilst staying in the same environment. I think there's something, making a big physical change brings something different energetically. So I think just massively changing my environment was really helpful. But Hastings, the sea, there's just, I mean, David and I read an article about a year ago, and neither of us can find it again, and we're sure we didn't make it up. There's been quite a bit of research about the psychological benefits of your eye being able to travel a long way and it not hitting something. And that makes sense to me. Do you know what I mean? That resonates. There's just something about being you don't have to be at the end of the land. You can be in the countryside, you can be, but just somewhere where your eye can travel a long way and not hit a building or not hit something. It's hard to put these things into words, isn't it? But when we were living in London, before we had decided for sure that we were going to move here, there was one particular day, so by this stage I wasn't working, I was spending a lot of time holed up in the flat, I was finding it quite hard to leave the flat and all the things that you do when you're depressed. And I was desperate to see the sun set, ideally into the water, and so I drove from Acton to here one afternoon. It wasn't until the afternoon that I had this that I suddenly thought, yeah, fuck it, I'll do it. So I drove myself here. I think it was in the winter, and so a bit of a rush to get here before the sun disappeared. And I went and stood on the beach in Hastings, and I just had this just really important moment where it was winter, so luckily there weren't other people around, and so I was just able to go with it, and I laughed out loud and I cried. And it was standing by the sea that gave me this feeling. I said, you can do this, Pippa, you can do this. And I don't really know what this meant, living, I think, life. I don't mean that I had been suicidal, because I hadn't been suicidal, but I had totally lost my appetite for life. Although it's bad for me, it doesn't do me any favours. I am drawn to creating adrenaline, and I've in my life I've moved a lot. I've completely changed careers several times. So I've retrained. I've put myself in. I've created quite a lot of stress. So I've been drawn to that, and I've been drawn to speed, and I drive too fast, and I run the petrol right down so I almost don't make it to the garage, and all those kind of things that you do when there's something a bit out of kilter. And I still do all those things, but what I have learnt in the last few years, which is part of coming to this grinding halt where I couldn't do it anymore, I couldn't do anything anymore, and moving here and living near the sea, and Hastings is I love it. It's a really fantastic place. It's far enough away from London or from a central business district to mean that it has a certain, but it's not so far that it's kind of got just a purely kind of hippie vibe, but it's far enough away from business to have a really wonderful energy. People here are, there are real economic problems, but people here are interested in, they're quite celebratory, they're interested in having a good time. And there's a real, give it a go kind of mentality, which quite often means that stuff that goes on in Hastings is quite shambolic, but which is actually brilliant. But it's because people haven't brain ached it to death. They've thought about it, they've had the idea, and they thought, let's give it a go. So it kind of feels like if I was ever going to become a potter, if I was ever going to have the cheek and the gall to think that maybe I was allowed to be a potter, it was going to happen here. This is my first wheel, this is my first kiln, which arrived about 5-6 weeks ago. I'd never fired my own stuff before. When you work, like the kiln rooms or Turning Earth, all these places, and where I was in Kent, where I made my stuff, that it gets taken away and put into the kiln for you. Unless we sort of followed a vocational path in the first place, then maybe that's a bit different. But I think for lots of us, we just tweak our life around the edges, because we just can't conceive of doing a complete and utter throwing it all up in the air. It's really hard to even imagine that, even occur to you. So I'm not grateful for the events. It'd be odd for me to say I'm really grateful that I couldn't, become a mum or whatever. I'm accepting of it, you know, but I am actually grateful that I that I that I was broken. I was broken for a while. So I, you know, so then I was a blank canvas, and I was able to, and because I was a blank canvas at the age of 43, I was able to kind of consciously, mindfully, thoughtfully kind of build myself from scratch like Frankenstein's monster, but you know, with choice. I was able to make choices, which actually has been the most incredible opportunity that's come out of, you know, a lot of darkness. You know, the sea is there. You could see it if it wasn't so misty, and you can see we've got this garden which is fairly abandoned, but you know, we've got birds, we've got life, we've got a constantly evolving scene here, little world here. Yeah, just to be, to stop planning. And so I enrolled. So Sussex Coast College is literally 5 minutes walk from here. I enrolled on a pottery course, not because I wanted to become a potter, because I fancied doing a pottery course. So I stopped. And you know, I would not have got here if I hadn't have stopped planning and being ambitious and having goals and all that stuff. And again, that's the benefit of being broken. That stuff all just fell away. And so I went to Sussex Coast College and spent an afternoon a week doing a bit of coiling and hand building, just because I wanted to do it. So I did that, and that was wonderful. And then I was really keen to learn to throw. But again, you know, although I knew that at some point quite soon I was going to have to get my act together to make some money, because we need me to earn some money, we did have there's been enough time for me to explore the pottery without thinking I had to become a potter. And that's been lovely, really lovely. So at no point during this whole, and I'm not doing it now, and I'm not going to do it. It's so important to me to keep the joy of making, or to keep the joy of pottery, and I'll do anything to protect it, because I know that it can so easily become like any other job. I'm really aware of the benefits and the blessings of me having come to this at this age, because I know what I want, I know what makes me happy and unhappy, I know what makes me really stressed, I now know what happens to me when I'm really stressed. Because I have chopped and changed my work so much, it's given me, not, and I hadn't really thought about it consciously until this conversation, but it's given me a kind of security and a kind of a knowledge that I can earn a living, and so I don't have to do this. If this didn't work, I mean, I hate the idea, you know, it's going to work, but I need to earn money, but I'm not doing, if this was about earning money, I'd be foolish to be doing pottery. There are lots of other things I can do where I can earn probably more money than I will probably ever earn doing pottery. And that's quite helpful to me. So this is about something very different, and I feel, like I said earlier, extremely protective of that. So every time an opportunity comes up, it's not that I've got an actual checklist or whatever, but I've got all these criteria which are just there. I don't even really have to think about them, but they help me to weigh up that opportunity really quick to know whether it fits with what I want my life to look like now. Most of us don't get the chance to actually make choices every day about what we do and what we don't do. And so I'm just going to say, even though I feel slightly I was going to say ashamed, that is the word that comes up. I feel very sheepish, because although it's not quite true, because we all have a choice, and we make choices, and we don't have a lot of money, and that's part of the choices that I'm making, and we're fine with that. So we haven't got the money to go on holidays and whatever, but that's fine. But So for the first time in my life, and most people don't ever do this in their life, so this is why I feel so lucky that I've even got the possibility of saying this. I want my life to look a certain way. I want to be able to, yesterday, as well as doing some pottery stuff, I cycled a couple of miles to meet a friend who has a beach hut, and we sat and talked for 2 hours and drank lemon verbena tea. And a few days before that, I went for a swim in the sea during the working day. My working life up until this point has been like many of us, it's been very intense and pressured and full of hustling, and especially because I've chosen lots of kind of salesy type roles. It's been lots of dressing up, lots of dressing up in what didn't feel like my clothes to go to meetings, and behave in a way that didn't feel like me. All that stuff. And saying things and doing things that you need to say and do to please people higher up the food chain, and all that stuff. I've done it. I've done lots of it, and I know how it feels, and it feels shit. I got quite emotional. I didn't realise this was going to happen, but the first day when that room was all kind of done, and I had the wheel and I had the kiln, and I had this real moment of realising that actually that was instead of the child. That wouldn't have happened. And actually, in a way, that kind of helps me have clarity about, in a way, it's come at a cost. It's come at a cost, and one of the things about not being a parent is you have freedom, and part of me being okay about not being a parent has been, first of all, a kind of theoretical gratitude practice where I didn't actually feel these things, but I kept telling myself how lucky I was to have the freedom. But now it's become a real thing where I feel lucky to have freedom, and I'm going to keep that freedom, and that helps me say no as well. But this for me, and I'm saying this and I'm pointing at the pottery studio, is the opposite. I'm doing the opposite. I'm behaving in the opposite way to how I've behaved in the past, and it feels really important. I'm slow. I am so uninterested in feeling like a factory. I want to keep the joy in what I'm doing, and I do believe that translates into the thing, and that other people will enjoy the stuff I'm making. I don't think I'm just saying this because I'm trying to justify it. I don't think, but I want to keep feeling joyful about it and sending stuff out joyfully, not resentfully. And I think that will make it more joyful to own my bud vases and my mugs and my lidded pots and my whatever. I'm really conscious of the fact that I'm doing something that, clay, glaze, dust, none of these things are great for anyone. I don't want to bring them out there into David and food and whatever. So if I'm doing something messy, I hold the doors closed. I've got this. I wear the pottery. I've got lots of aprons, and so I wear those shoes in here. But it all feels quite easy. But I'll just take those shoes off and go upstairs and take these clothes off and bung them in the washing machine. And so it's sort of in here, and it kind of feels. I was thinking about this room, and because a few people have commented on Instagram in response to seeing photos of it. God, what a beautiful space, and it's so tidy. I think it's quite unusual to have your wheel in the middle of the room. Quite often you have it facing a wall or in the corner of a room, and so quite often there's a whole. This is just lino. So quite often there's a whole area of wall which is just covered in clay. I love this room. It's got such a nice feeling, hasn't it? And there's something about the fact that, for most of us, when we move home or whatever, we move house, we've had a sitting room before, so we move all the stuff from our old sitting room into our new sitting room. We've had a bedroom, we move all the stuff, and it's not very conscious, and you just build up all your clutter and your stuff, and you stop questioning whether you still want that object and that thing. You just bring it from your last place to your new place. I've never had a pottery studio before, So I was so again, this sort of carrying on this whole thing of a blank canvas, and there is something about, I have got this overwhelming sense of privilege. I feel so privileged and so grateful that I've got this space, and there's something about I've been really just, I don't know, I've had the opportunity to only put stuff in here that I love, that is all that's really useful, or is useful and beautiful, even better. I mean, wherever possible, that's what I've been doing. So here we've got this just this second-hand wooden cupboard that I bought from a local shop in Hastings. It was 150 quid or something. So in the cupboard at the bottom there is just various tools. There's a tile cutter and it's called a whirler, a little metal spinny, I don't know what you'd call it. It's a whirler. Google it. But it enables you to work on a piece and to turn it around and see it from every angle. Various kind of throwing tools there and trimming tools. These are my very first bud vases that I ever made. And on Instagram, actually, the other day when I posted a picture of this first batch of bud vases, I'm really grateful to a woman on there. She said to me, you should keep one of those. And it's crazy that hadn't occurred to me, that I would allow myself to keep one of them. And I was really grateful to her for saying that. So I thought, I should keep one of these. The first thing I've ever made in my own place, in my own kiln. So I'm going to keep that. I made that. That's one of the first lidded pots I ever made. I'm really proud of it. That's a load of little wear boards. So when I make a bud vase, I don't throw it on on what's called a bat. I just throw it straight on the wheel head and I slide it off onto a little square of MDF. So that's what they are. I bought that the other day, which I'm hoping is both beautiful and useful. So it's a little antique wooden mallet. So I'm going to use that to reshape things that I've thrown. I bought that from a local shop, and I don't know whether I'll ever use it, and so I probably will use it it's a stamp. It's an old Indian wooden stamp, and I expect at some point I'll use that to make impressions in clay, to make something or other. That's one of the first 2 bud vases that I made here from scratch. These are 2 little enamelled bowls. So this was during my frantic period of making. I did a bit of enamelling. So these prints over here, Kathy Hutton, got 3 of them, really love them. And she's someone that I've connected with and met on Instagram. I love Instagram. It feels so different to me. For me, I don't get the other social media platforms anywhere near as much as I get Instagram. It feels really nurturing. There's a really lovely, generous community where there's teasing and sharing of information and encouragement, and I really find it amazing, really beautiful. Anyway, so this lovely woman, this happened a few times actually. A few artists have posted pics on Instagram of paintings and things they have done of my pots, which has been really lovely. So she saw that pot, which has not yet been glazed, and she did a monoprint of it. Aprons, bought that the other day, and that's an old shaker. So yes, this is the first batch of bud vases that I have made on my own, where I mixed up the glaze and learnt how to use the kiln and did it all entirely on my own. Yeah, I love them. And I quite like the whole, I've got more and more into rituals, and I really enjoy, and I've got very into, I never thought I would, but through happening to make bud vases, I've got really into arranging flowers and seeing flowers, and it's amazing how that brings life to these bud vases. So I went and bought these flowers earlier today and put them in them, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, these bud vases are living, breathing things. And it seems people, I mean, maybe it's everything that is handmade. Maybe people relate to it in an emotional way, but I get the most wonderful emails with photos of their bud vases they've bought from me with flowers in, talking to me about what it means and how much joy it brings them when they wake up to it on their bedside table. I think in addition to that, for me, something that I really hadn't thought would be part of making pottery, something that's been a thread that has gone through all of the work I've chosen to do, even though on the face of it, the various careers I've had they could look utterly different, but something that's run through them all is human relationships. That's been part of everything that I've done, and I really had thought that this would be devoid of that, because I'd just be sitting here making stuff and people buying it and I'd be selling it to them or whatever, or shop. But I'm so happy that it's a part of it, that and I don't know whether, because I've mostly been making bud vases at the moment so far, because I love doing it and people love buying them and love using them, and it's a joyful thing to make something that you put flowers in. You put flowers that people have grown in. But I think the thing, what's really surprised me is how it's not just about it's not just that people are using the thing, but it's that they feel emotional about the thing and they tell me stuff about their life. Somehow a bud vase triggers a real conversation about life. Because in the past I've always sought adrenaline and quicker and whatever, so I was naturally drawn to the wheel. I bought this couple of £100 or something, and I bought before I got my studio, ready for my studio. I bought this thing called a Giffin grip, so I bought that so that I could put that on the wheel and do lots of fast trimming, and actually I used it once, but what I've realised is that I really enjoy, all of these bud vases, I trimmed them by hand. I didn't even do it on the wheel at all. So I used this. So so you take them off the board with a wire, and and they're really smooth. And I removed all the wire marks and grooves and funny bits with this and a sponge, and really. Someone said the other day, because I put a video at a time, a speeded up video on Instagram, and someone said, God, I never realised how much you touched it when you were making it, and that's short, and how lovely. And so it sort of they became more precious to her, the fact that I had interacted with it so much. Because there is a kind of alchemy and chemistry, and you really haven't got full control of it, because it it does what it does when it's heated up to the temperatures you heat it up to. You don't quite know exactly what's going to happen to it. For me, it's very easy for me to think if something looks different to how I imagined it would look, it's easy to think, well, that's faulty, it's not right, it's a second. And what I'm really, the conversation I had with this friend yesterday was actually how arrogant that is. Who am I to tell someone that is not a beautiful thing, whereas that is a beautiful thing? It's not up to me. It's it's just about, but it feels quite exposing and vulnerable, I think, to put something out there and to say you can buy this thing if you like, even though it's not how I thought it would be, and therefore I'm a bit insecure about whether it's beautiful. But I'm going to give you the opportunity to buy it if you want to, because you might find it beautiful. If something works, if it's not broken and it's not cracked, if it functions, then basically it is not up to me to decide that is not something I'm going to let anyone buy. When the sunshine's coming in and there's dappled light from the plants outside, and there is nothing better than sitting here and trimming my stuff quietly, or with Radio 6 on by hand. So this is a beautiful pot from Diana Fate, I think that's how you pronounce her name, I'm not sure, F-A-Y-T, who lives in California, American potter, which I really love. And so that is my trimming stuff, my hand trimming stuff. So that's, almost like a grater that you kind of grate stuff off, grate clay off, and then I use that to really finely tidy up the pot on the bottom. I use that if I spot an air bubble in it, so I could get the air out so it doesn't explode in the kiln. This if I end up by mistake kind of denting the bottom of the pot, I'll sort of put this in and tap out the shape of the bottom of the pot again. Before you glaze your work, one of the things you can do, not everyone does this, but one of the things you can do to stop getting glaze on the bottom of the pot so it doesn't then stick to the kiln shelf is you paint wax onto it. So that's my wax brushes and my waxing pot where I put my wax. And there are all sorts of things. So these brushes, I've used the equivalent of these are new to me, but you can use them to paint, cobalt oxide or to paint decoration on your pots. These, if you're making mugs or something, or you're making something where you're sticking a form onto another form, you stipple and create. So you stipple the surface of the two things you want to stick together and put a bit of and create a bit of moisture on the clay as well, and then they're going to stick together better. So there, some of the bits and pieces. They're calipers. So when I'm making a lidded pot, or if you want to make loads of things the same size, then you use the calipers to measure the rim of the pot and then to make the lid the same. And particularly because I'm trimming them by hand, which means I can't make some crappy form and then turn it into something decent on the wheel with a tool. It has to be, I'm throwing a decent shape in the first place because I'm not doing the machine turning. So it's not that there's no discipline in what I'm making, but I am so reveling in, dinnerware. It just makes my heart sink, the idea of making X number of things the same size and shape. Yeah, I just really don't want to do it. These are sexy scales so that you can, if you want to make things which are fairly uniform, you can weigh the amount of clay you're using. So that is the one thing at the moment I do have that is vaguely disciplined. Yeah, so these are bags of clay. These are other things to cut clay with. These are some unmixed glazes, so it's powder, glaze in powder form, which I've yet to mix. Various stuff that's been biscuit fired that's waiting for me to glaze it. This is a new wheel head, a new to me wheel head I bought from Pot Clays that I'll be putting on my wheel in the next few days. This is a lovely little chest of drawers that I found that was just perfect. I love coming in here, which is exactly what I hoped it would make me feel. So sometimes I come in here, I sat down here the other day and read a magazine here. I wasn't even making something. I read Oh Comely, sat here with a cup of tea, because I love this space so much. So no, I don't prepare to come in here. I stumble out of bed, and it's lovely. I can come and at the moment there isn't any stuff that I've recently thrown, but when you've thrown stuff, you have to keep an eye on it about how dry it is and whether it's ready for trimming, and do you need to put it in plastic so it doesn't dry out too quickly, and is it cracking, and do you have to catch it quickly before it gets too dry if you want to trim it and put your stamp on the bottom. And so it's actually really lovely. I can literally fall out of bed, come in here I can hardly see, in my pyjamas, and just come and touch my pots and turn them over and see if they're ready for the next stage. And so I really love that. I haven't got any formal education in pottery, and I'm kind of making it up as I go along. So I do have tremendous imposter syndrome, and I wonder how much of that, and I'm very conscious of the fact that through all sorts of circumstances coming together and a shitload of good fortune and luck, I haven't had to push people. I've just been so fortunate. I haven't had to knock on anyone's door. So it's just happening, it's just flowing, and there is some guilt about that. I haven't had to slog my guts out for years. I mean, I have had to slog my guts out in life, and I suppose in a way that's the apprenticeship to get here. Perhaps that's the way of looking at it. That's you know, that's the work that I've done to make these pots. But you know, I haven't got formal training, and so there's something that I can't quite compute about the fact that I'm on the receiving end of this great good fortune that I'm making. At no point have I sat down and thought, what can I make that will be commercially viable? What can I make that people will like? I haven't done that. I've just made what I feel like making, and people are liking it and wanting to buy it, and there's more demand than I can make, and that's an amazing position to be in. I thought I would never be that potter who is so ridiculous that they risk breaking their stuff. You know, you'll be aware of this. There's loads of talk about it amongst potters all the time about what temperature it's safe to open the kiln without shocking your work. And I used to read about these things before I had my own kiln, and I was like, why on earth? How ridiculous. And people talk about putting padlocks on to stop themselves opening the kiln. But in opening the kiln before it's dropped below a certain temperature, you're risking the work. So I used to think it was absolutely ridiculous, but now I'm doing the same thing. Not now, I'm not. 41 degrees is fine, but slightly toasty. Wow. So let's see whether any of them have cracked. Oh, they're a nice temperature. I might always wait for this temperature. Oh, cute. 40 degrees. Oh, I'm so pleased that they've survived. Those little ones, I made them as testers, and actually I like them so much that I didn't use them as testers, and people were so like, oh my god, are you going to be making mini bud vases? I thought, actually, yeah, you can talk about, you know, that thing, there's something about it fitting in the palm, fitting in one hand, isn't there? It's almost like a little creature. So talk about ritual. I've got this lovely bag, which this is the bag I use to come and get my toasty work and carry it from here to there, and I really like that. Yeah, gorgeous. It always amazes me how much weight they lose, how much how much they shrink, and how much less heavy they become during both their firings. Which is lovely because it makes you feel like your work is better than you thought it was when you put it in there. It's like, oh, my throwing is actually quite fine.